Welcome to Illuminating Catholics, podcast of the Diocese of Sioux City. I'm Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese. Together with Carmen Bauer of the Faith Formation Office, we will shed light upon topics of faith in the modern church. Our guests include Catholic clergy, religious sisters, and other experts in their fields to help us understand what's happening in the church today. We will explore issues, even the tough ones, and to find answers to common questions about Catholicism. Thank you for joining us for today's Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Welcome back to the Illuminating Catholics podcast. I'm Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese of Sioux City.
And I'm Carmen Bauer, the Director of Faith Formation.
We can't thank you enough for listening to our podcast and subscribing. We're just so appreciative that you spend a few minutes with us at least once a week. We have a special guest today who last appeared on the podcast in March 2025 while he was still in Ashtabula, Ohio. The episode which holds the record for the most downloads of our podcast. Yes, it's Bishop John Keehner. He's here. He said people are always asking him what his hobbies are, and he is going to share his genealogy passion with us and why it's important, and a few surprises in his family tree as well. So welcome back to the podcast, Bishop.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you this morning.
And you're actually in person, because last time it was over Zoom.
Right. So it's good to see you as well as speak to you.
Keep an eye on us, right?
Right.
Well, we're so glad that you're with us today. It's been a few months since you first joined us on the podcast. I can't believe we're coming up on the year of the announcement of,
Yes.
of you as our bishop. And you've obviously had a few things going on since you last joined us, such as your Episcopal ordination and serving as our new bishop. So I'm sure the audience would like to know how you're doing in this role in this new diocese.
I still feel like I'm very new and very wet behind the ears in so many ways, but I've had so many wonderful experiences and some difficult ones as well. But I've ordained a priest. What a blessing that was. I've rededicated a church, a totally new experience for me, and a really moving experience, not just for me, but I think certainly for that parish. I've celebrated the funerals for two of our elderly priests who've died, and again, death is never something we welcome, but just recognizing the impact that these two priests made on the people that knew them and loved them, people they served, certainly their families, really edifying experiences for me. And then just really getting to know the diocesan staff, getting to know people in the parishes, just really I've had some wonderful experiences with confirmations and some parish visits, so all is going well.
You've been really busy.
I have been busy, and I just got back from an 8-day retreat with the other bishops of the region, so coming back feeling somewhat refreshed, but also kind of missing the fasting from the emails and the texting and all of that. A little overwhelmed.
Sorry about that, Bishop.
That's okay.
We're all guilty of emailing and texting him.
Yeah, that's okay.
We're glad you're back. You've said that as you've been going around the diocese, as you just mentioned, meeting your flock, meeting different groups and talking to media, that you're often asked, so what's your hobby? What do you like to do? And of course, obviously, it's genealogy because we're here talking about it. So why genealogy, Bishop? And when did you get started in this?
I grew up until I was a senior in high school with the foundational pillar of my family was my great-grandfather, my mother's maternal grandfather. And just listening to his stories of his childhood. He was born in 1891, and he died at the age of 92 while I was a senior in high school, and I loved listening to his stories. And he was we've since disproved some of the family stories that he for example, he claimed to be of Native American ancestry, but I can't find any evidence of that through DNA, and have been in contact with eighth cousins who have the same stories, but none of us share that DNA. And So, but in any event, I really got to love the stories that he told, and was surprised then to find out that my family had been in the Mahoning Valley, which is where Youngstown is located, for over 200 years. And really learning the local history was very much learning my family history. And so I really fell in love with that, and it's been my hobby since I was probably a senior in high school when I had to do a genealogy project as part of the local history course, and that's when I learned about my family's history being so closely linked to the history of the Mahoning Valley. So it's really been a hobby. It's something you can do for a while and then put aside and then pick up again. I'm not nearly obsessive about it as I was maybe in the maybe 20 years ago, but it's still something I enjoy looking at, and I enjoy because of the DNA research, I've been able to meet up with cousins, even people that I knew as a child that I've lost contact with, that I've been able to contact through the genealogical website, because they're looking for some of the same answers that I'm looking for.
As someone who's not familiar, has not done genealogy research, so I know there's companies out there. You reference DNA. I know there's groups that do that too. How did you start, or have you used like a combination of resources to do your research?
A lot of my research in Youngstown was done locally. Youngstown and Warren, which is just north of Youngstown, part of the old Connecticut Western Reserve, have great genealogical libraries. And again, just looking at some of the history books of Trumbull County and Mahoning County, I found a lot of references to members of my family, a lot of photographs, even etchings. So that was a large part of my research. Some of the genealogical websites are excellent and have really allowed me to make connections with family trees that were already in existence. So, I could go back so far on my mother's side, and then I got back to my 4 times great-grandparents, and I kept wondering, where is my great-great-great-great-grandmother from? I knew that her husband fought in the American Revolution. I know where they're buried, and I've been to the grave many times. It was very close to where I lived. But I kept wondering, where is she from? And I assumed that she was of German ancestry. Well, I finally went on a message board on Ancestry.com and was asking this question, and I was contacted by a professional genealogist who said, your Susanna Mann, that was her name, M-A-N-N, is the same Susanna Mann that disappears from the records of Wrentham, Massachusetts at the time of the American Revolution. It's because she left and got married, and she married my 4 times great-grandfather, who was an immigrant from the Antrim coast of Ireland. And they, after the war, they left and went to what is now Liberty Township in Trumbull County, Ohio, just north of Youngstown, and homesteaded. Well, it ends up that Susanna Mann's connections go back to the Mayflower, and then beyond the Mayflower, these family trees are already in existence, and I just had to, plug into them. Realize, well, I've got a family tree going back to Charlemagne and beyond. So it's fascinating.
I want to note that Bishop's not using any notes. All this stuff is on the top of his head, at least so far in this in this interview. So just want to say that. So can you share with us that you talked about Charlemagne, and we talked informally about that in the past. Maybe some other interesting information that you found, any special characters, any surprises?
I've found out that I'm distantly related to the Adams family from Massachusetts, the family of the presidents. Distantly related to Lizzie Borden, which one of my family members just found particularly hilarious. Distantly related to, actually my the great-grandfather whom I mentioned, his stepfather was imprisoned for being a chicken thief, which my mother just found great mirth in. She knew him, she knew that who would have been her great-grandfather, at least by marriage. Actually found out that I'm descended directly and indirectly from several saints, which when I was ordained a bishop, I asked for some specific names to be added to the litany of saints, because I am reportedly, if one genealogist is wrong on one detail, the whole thing falls apart, and I realize that, but distantly a distant descendant of St. Louis, of the King of France, who is reportedly my 22 times great-grandfather. St. Margaret of Scotland is reportedly my 26th times great-grandmother. St. Lawrence O'Toole, he was a bishop, the patron saint of Dublin. I'm obviously not directly descended from him, but from his sister Maura, who would be, I believe, like my 23rd great-grandmother. And then cousins of a few others, like St. Margaret Poole. She was a member of the Plantagenet family, and she was, the first cousin of King Henry VIII, and she was the tutor and governess of Queen Mary, and she was charged with treason because she retained her Catholic faith and remained faithful to the church. And then, one of the Arundels, and I don't remember which one, is canonized as one of the English martyrs. And then there are a few others more. There's a Saint Matilda that's somewhere in my family tree. Matilda of Ringelheim. I've got the note right here, and I don't know exactly how far back she goes, but something like my 27 times great-grandmother, and she dates back to the 9th century. It's fascinating to me.
So, kind of a dumb question for you.
Yeah.
Now, I've had the pleasure of seeing these giant binders that Father Michael Cronin has.
Oh, yeah.
I
have too.
Okay, that was part of my question. Where is all this stuff stored? Is it electronic and binders, or everywhere?
Most of what I have now is digital. I had an entire filing cabinet filled with raw data, which I had to let go of. I've moved so many times that carrying that around was burdensome, and letting it go was very difficult. But it was necessary, and most of what I need I can now find online. Most of what I have found is now online, and so letting it, even photographs, family photographs, I have online. So I'll have an entry, for example, my grandmother, and I'll have photographs of her with her parents, with her siblings, with her husband, my grandfather, with her children, with me and my siblings and my cousins. The nice thing about these websites is that you have a lot of opportunities to put information in. I've even digitized obituaries and attached them to the individual entries. So most of what I have is now digital.
Mm-hmm. Giant flash drive.
Yeah, giant flash drive. I just directly use the website.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you had mentioned again, I think informally and earlier, that when you started researching, you found some relatives, or they found you through the research. Mm-hmm. And maybe there was even somebody that you didn't know you were related to, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I remember. It was during the parish festival at, where was I? I was at St. Christine in Youngstown, and I got a text one morning from my cousin Paul, wanting to know if I knew anything about anybody in the family having been adopted out, and I knew. And it wasn't because of family history research that I had done, but I had known. My one aunt had told me Paul's mother had died very young, and her sister Roselia had told me that if anybody came knocking, because this was at the time when the DNA results were just really becoming popular, and people were finding relatives. She said, if anybody comes knocking, you need to know that Janice had a son, and who was adopted, and so I knew. So I talked to Paul that evening, and it ends up that somebody he was also on this website, and somebody had contacted him and said, I think you're my uncle. And so he wanted to know what was going on, and did I know anything? Because he knew that I did genealogy, and I said, well, I know, but I said, you need to know this wasn't my story to tell you. I didn't know if your mother had told you before she died. I didn't know if you'd ever heard from this person, but he was then contacted and became very close to his half-brother that he had never met before, that he didn't know about. And that half-brother, incidentally, just died in May. But ironically, when I was cathedral rector in Youngstown, I had his baptismal record at my fingertips and never knew it. And my aunt's name was on that record. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know it. So, my cousin Paul, who has now lost all three of his siblings, has nieces and nephews he never knew about, and he's very happy that he's got to know them, and I think they're happy to know him as well. So that was a surprise, and at first a difficult surprise for him to grasp. But I think a lot of people have similar stories where they've met somebody in the family because somebody was adopted, or somebody just appears out of nowhere, and because of the DNA accessibility, they find out they're related.
How great to make those connections.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of connections, so if you are the family archivist, researcher, are your siblings, your cousins, have they shown an interest in what you've uncovered? Do you ever done like a family reunion, did a big PowerPoint, or?
I tried, and for the most part was met with disinterest.
Oh.
My one aunt said it to me at one point, oh, who cares about all that? We're here, let's just be together. And
you're thinking decades of research.
Decades of research. My nieces had no interest until they found out that we were descended from the Plantagenet and Capetian dynasties.
Really?
Now we're royalty. I said, that and $3 will buy you a cup of coffee. Because, we're so far descended. I think our latest royal antecedent is Edward III, going back to the 13th century. So, so it's kind of ridiculous, I was joking. I was with a friend in England at the end of my sabbatical in the fall of 2024, and I said, we were at Windsor Castle, and I said, I should go knock on the door and say, I'm your 23rd cousin.
Get out of here.
So I'll get arrested.
Yeah.
So my nieces were fascinated by that, but it's interesting. It's not just one line. It's like one line times 30. Found out, for example, that I'm descended from John of Gaunt, who was the son of, I don't remember who his father was, but I'm descended from him in like 17 different ways.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, and if you understand, and we've got 8 billion people in the world today, probably 10 billion, I don't know, but the population was much smaller, but your ancestry expands exponentially as you go back. And so, I was at first very surprised, shocked, and horrified to find out that, in my family tree there were cousins marrying cousins, and I'd see the same name over and over again, or that I would be descended from the same person 3 or 4 ways. And then, it's just the way it is. In fact, I mentioned Charlemagne. Statistically speaking, if you are of Western European descent, you are a descendant of Charlemagne. I just happen to be able to document it.
The rest of us will just
Yeah.
make it up.
Yeah, but it's true. It's true because the number of persons was so much smaller, and again, as the population expands, you realize, okay, have to be descended from this person in some way, and so I was recently reading an article that most people of English descent are in some way, shape, or form descended from William the Conqueror. Well, I happen to be able to document it, and again, that's predicated on the fact that I'm using genealogical research that's already been done, and hoping that nobody made a mistake or that somebody wasn't lying.
Well, that's true. So I'm guessing you don't have a lot. You said you like to look back and read what you've researched and so forth. I'm guessing you haven't had as much time to do that in the last 7 months.
No, but I still get alerts of new DNA matches, and I look at them, and in fact, just connected with a cousin. She doesn't remember meeting me, but I remember her, and this would again been on that same great-grandfather side of the family, and this is in Tyrone, Pennsylvania. I remember being at her grandparents' house many times and my mother was very close to that great aunt of hers, and spending a lot of very happy memories. I have very many happy memories from my childhood at their house, and she happened to be away at the time that most of that took place. So she contacted me and she said, you look like you're related to me. Could you be my brother? I'm looking for a long lost brother. And I said, no, I'm your cousin. I remember you. I said, oh, I don't remember you.
Oh, wow. So sorry.
That's okay. But when I mentioned I knew her father, I was at her father's second marriage, wedding. Mentioned that I, spent many days, even weeks at her grandparents' house, and then started mentioning some of her first cousins that I knew well at one time. Oh, you really are related to us. Yes. Yeah. So.
Well, it's been very apparent to us how important your Irish heritage is. I believe even at your ordination that influenced some of the components, the music.
Some of the music, yeah.
The saints as well, were there some?
St. Lawrence O'Toole, okay. Lorcan O'Toole. He was the patron saint of Dublin.
Oh, yes.
So I'm a collateral descendant of his.
So would you be able just to bring us into your experiences with Ireland a little bit more, your pilgrimages to the holy sites? It sounds like you were there within the last year visiting.
I was, yes. So I've been to Ireland 3 times. The first time I went with my cousin Christine, probably my favorite cousin, whom I adore. We just can't travel together anymore.
Hi, Christine.
Too many hours, too close, and she would agree. I drove her as crazy as she drove me. So my first time was 2013. I was there again in 2018, and there again just this past summer, helping to lead a pilgrimage. And on this pilgrimage, we went first to Downpatrick, to the cathedral and the St. Patrick's Center, and above the St. Patrick's Center, up the hill, is the tomb of St. Patrick, and also reportedly buried with him are St. Columba and St. Bridget, and I have a great devotion to all 3 of them. I was rector of St. Columba Cathedral. In fact, on my coat of arms there's a dove, and that dove represents St. Columba because Columba literally means dove, and he was called the dove of the church, Columkill. So I had Mass at their tomb, which is outside, and there was just a little bit of rain. And the next day we went to Armagh, which is the primatial see of Ireland, and we had Mass in the cathedral, which is a beautiful shrine to St. Oliver Plunkett, and who was martyred. Again, one of the martyrs of the English Reformation. We met the Archbishop, who came over to say hello to us, and I don't think he met us because I was a bishop. He met us because I have connections with him through the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and one of my best friends was the former national president and is now an emissary to Ireland for the state of Ohio in terms of their trade. And so he made connections for us. And so then we also went to Croagh Patrick, and Croagh Patrick is associated with the expulsion of the Druids from Ireland. And it's a hill, which they call it Reek Sunday, which is, I think, the fourth Sunday in, maybe the fifth Sunday in July, or I'm not sure when they designate that, but it's a day of traditional pilgrimage where pilgrims would climb the mountain, often barefoot. I made it up most of the way, and at the probably 4.5 mile mark, my body said no more. And so I waited while some of the other pilgrims made it to the top and then came down. But it's, I had some time for personal prayer there, prayed the rosary, while I was waiting for them. But just the fact that I made it that high, and I'm used to walking. I walked the Camino de Santiago the year before. It just, for some reason, I don't know if I was dehydrated or I just couldn't go any further. And I knew my body was saying, don't go further. So we also visited Glendalough, which is associated with St. Kevin, where St. Kevin's monastery was. Really a beautiful site. We had Mass in Dublin itself, at the cathedral there. We also spent a day at Knock. Knock is in County Mayo, located about 8 miles from my family's hometown. And so we spent the day at Knock. I got to celebrate Mass at the chapel of the apparition, which was really a highlight of the pilgrimage for me, knowing that my family lived 8 miles away while that was going on. So that was very special to me. And then as we left Knock, we were going into Claremorris, which was their hometown. And I said, oh, by the way, there's a cemetery on the road, which I've been to several times before, which is located in the ruins of an old Carmelite monastery. And the bus driver said, oh, I've seen that many times. I've always wanted to stop. So he said, let's do it. We had time. So we stopped at the cemetery. It's called Balinas Mala. And I got to show, I had some third cousins on the bus with us. I got to show them the grave of our great-great-grandparents and our great-great-great-grandparents. And we don't know if there are other people buried there that we're descended from, because most of the markers are now unreadable because of the lime and the salt air corroding the stone. But so that was very special for me. But it was a wonderful pilgrimage.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I've heard it's just such a beautiful place to visit,
it
especially
is.
When you have those ties.
Yes.
It makes it that much
Yes.
more special.
Absolutely.
As you look back on, this hobby of genealogy, what would you say is your greatest gift, the greatest gift you've received from this research?
I began researching my grandfather with maybe a little bitterness. My grandfather, when I was a very young child, I have very happy memories of my great-grandfather. But as I grew older, after my grandmother died, his real struggles became apparent, and the struggles his children had with him, and some difficulties in their upbringing became apparent. And so I had difficult feelings associated with my grandfather. And then doing the research, I realized my grandfather, at the age of 10, he was born in 1910. At the age of 10, he was probably 9, he lost his mother and 2 of his sisters in the Spanish flu, and his older brother was paralyzed after that because he had such a high fever that caused neurological damage. And his father unable to deal with it, sent him away to live with strangers. Learning that really allowed me to forgive him. And then looking at his father, realizing that by the time he was 35 years old, he'd been widowed twice. He lost his first wife in childbirth. The child survived. So my grandfather had an older half-brother who lived, I think, into his 30s and then was killed in a car accident. But my grandfather was very close to his children, who and I remember his widow, my Aunt Clara, very clearly. She was, always an important part of our family, even after she remarried. But learning the struggles, the difficulties members of my family have faced really has allowed me to forgive many things that I perhaps held on to before. Just understanding what my grandfather went through as a child explained a lot of what he went through as an older adult. And his abandonment issues and, so in many ways, genealogy has not just taught me about history, it's taught me about family dynamics and understanding how fragile people are and how so many difficulties get passed on. We just don't inherit our parents' physical attributes. We sometimes inherit their struggles. We talk about generational dysfunction, and learning about that has really helped me to be more forgiving.
What a tremendous gift to have that perspective.
Absolutely, and to the point that I can think back on my grandfather now with no bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
Just he was a flawed individual, but I can think more now of the happy times we had, and remember him with love, and that was good.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think there are lots of lessons for so many of us as we ponder, that experience of yours. So before we close, what would you say to someone considering embarking upon a genealogy hobby?
Well, be prepared to meet the good, the bad, and the ugly. The chicken thieves, the alcoholics, the very good persons who lived lives of valor. I look back at some of my great uncle, for example, who was a prisoner of war during the Second World War, and lived through 18 months of a prison camp in Germany, and what he went through. And again, I knew him. He died when I was a senior in high school, and loved him because he was very close to my family. But just be prepared to see people on a different level. You know them, or you've heard stories about them, but if you find out about them from a different perspective, be prepared to be surprised, and that's a good thing. I talked about the great-great-grandfather who was the chicken thief. My great-great-grandmother who, had 8 different children with maybe 5 different men, just, okay, that's who she was. But, I found a lovely photograph of her with that same uncle who was the prisoner of war. And it must have been when he got out of when he was liberated and was back in the country, because they're sitting on her porch. And she's looking very old, and he's looking very emaciated. And she's wearing his military hat, and looking so proud.
What a neat keepsake.
It's a great photograph. So we have his Purple Heart. There's even a monument to him and the people. He was the only one who survived when his plane was shot down over the Netherlands. And there's a monument to them to this day that one of my cousins has since seen and photographed. I've never been there, but one of these days I hope to get there to see it. So don't be surprised by being surprised at what you find. I'm lucky because my family, at least my mother's family, has been in the United States for so long that so much is very clearly documented. I have a much more difficult time finding information about my father's family. In fact, I just met a distant cousin in December who lives near Denison. And I had the opportunity to sit with her, and she's on the Keehner side. And when she first contacted me after he became bishop, she said, well, we may not be related because my family's Lutheran. I said, well, my great-grandfather was Lutheran. He was baptized Martin Luther Keehner.
That tells you something.
Yeah, but he became Catholic later, after he was married to my great-grandmother. And I knew that he had several siblings who had immigrated to different parts of the nation after they had come from Germany, and actually found her grandmother in my family tree. So I know we're definitely related, and we had some of the same stories about a fire in a bakery in Brooklyn, and my great-grandfather had to get out of town, and that's when the family moved to Youngstown. And so she knew something about the fire. She didn't know that it was in a bakery, but they were bakers. And so don't be surprised at what you learn, and don't be surprised when you get to realize that there might be people that you're related to and you just don't realize it. I've had a lot of that happen to me. Was sitting in my office at St. Christine one day, and the lady that would count the money with the collection on money walked in, and she said, I hear you're related to Eddie Kunzer. I said, I am. He's my cousin. And she said, well, he's my brother. I said, oh, well, how about that?
We're related.
And my brother was friends with her daughter, and they didn't know it, that they were third cousins. Wow. So, don't be surprised. It in many ways, it's opened my vision, not just to history, but to recognizing that in some way we're all related, and those relationships often transcend bloodlines, but recognizing that we are brothers and sisters to one another.
Well said.
Thank you.
Said. Thank you so much, Bishop, for coming back to the podcast in person this time and sharing your family history with us and your passion. It is interesting hearing all those stories and why it is important for us to have that sense of family connections and relationship, as you just mentioned, no matter how it is that we get there. And thank you all for listening to today's Illuminating Catholics podcast and learning more about Bishop Keehner. New episodes will drop each Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts, the Diocese of Sioux City YouTube channel, or at lumenmedia.org. Thank you for listening to this episode of Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Follow us for more episodes on topics of the Catholic faith. For more diocesan news, visit lumenmedia.org.